Nobody is taking that girl home unless they own a barn with iron doors. The words cracked across the auction yard like a whip, and every face in Mercy Crossing turned toward the platform where Maribelle stood with her hands tied in front of her apron. Though no rope in that county could have held her if she had chosen to break it, she was taller than most men in the crowd, broad through the shoulders, thick through the arms, with a faded gray dress stretched tight over muscle earned from years of hauling water, splitting wood, and carrying other people's sorrow without being asked. Dust clung to her hair. Shame clung harder. The town clerk lifted a paper and cleared his throat, as if dignity could be found in paperwork. Able-bodied female. No known guardian willing to assume responsibility. Suitable for farm labor hauling, washing, timber stacking, and field service. Maribelle did not lower her eyes. She had learned long ago that looking down only gave cruel people permission to feel taller. Now, some folks later claimed they had always known there was more to that girl than size and silence. That was not true. Most only saw what fear told them to see, but the truth was far more complicated than anyone imagined. And if a heart ever wondered whether love could find a person after the whole world had named her unwanted, then it was worth staying until the end of this memory. Like it, if the telling finds a corner of the heart, and leave word of where this story reached, because some stories travel farther than the wagons that carried them. The first bid came as a joke. $2 and a cracked mule shoe called a freighter with tobacco in his cheek. Laughter rolled through the yard. Maribelle stood still. That was her gift and her punishment. Stillness made people believe she felt nothing. But inside her chest, every laugh landed somewhere soft. She had been passed between houses since she was 9 years old, first with pity, then convenience, then resentment. A family would take her when winter wood ran low or fields needed turning. They would call her a blessing when she carried what 3 men could not. Then spring would come, or gossip would grow, and suddenly she became too much food, too much shadow, too much woman, too large to cherish, too useful to release. The clerk shifted his spectacles. This is a lawful guardianship transfer, not amusement. Then let the county keep her, a woman muttered. She eats like a draft team. Maribelle's fingers curled. The rope creaked. A little boy near the fence stopped smiling when he heard it. At the far edge of the crowd, Callahan watched from beneath the brim of a weathered black hat. He had not come to Mercy Crossing for an auction. He had come for salt blocks, horseshoe nails, and coffee beans. He had come because a ranch still needed running, even when the man who owned it had forgotten how to live inside its walls. He was broad and quiet, with a beard dark as wet bark and hands scarred by rope burns, branding irons, and years of handling frightened animals gently enough to be trusted. Folks gave him room without thinking. Not because Callahan was cruel. He was not. But grief had made a fence around him, and most people respected fences better than feelings. His gaze had settled on Maribelle when the clerk named her unwanted. Then he saw the ribbon. It was half hidden in the tangled fall of her honey blonde hair, faded almost white at the edges, but still blue at the knot. A small, worn ribbon tied clumsily, as if she had kept it through every hard season without remembering why. Callahan stopped breathing for one long second. A memory rose from a grave. A woman voice, weak with fever. Find the child, Callahan. The one with that blue ribbon. Promise me. His jaw tightened. His gloved hand closed around the rail. Another man lifted his hand with an ugly grin. I could use her for stump pulling. The laughter was louder this time. Maribelle's chin trembled once. Only once. She pressed it still with pride so fierce it almost looked like anger. The clerk raised his voice. Any lawful household willing to assume guardianship and responsibility? Silence spread. There was a special cruelty in silence. Noise wounded a person where others could see. Silence left the cut hidden and expected the wounded one to stand politely. Callahan stepped forward. Boot heels sounded against packed earth. The crowd parted. Men who had been laughing found sudden interest in the dust. Women leaned toward one another, whispering. The clerk blinked as Callahan came to the front, his broad shoulders blocking the afternoon sun from Maribelle's face. For the first time, she looked at him, not down, Not up by much, straight across. That startled him more than her size. Her eyes were gray and guarded, with a tiredness no young woman should have carried. She looked ready for insult, prepared for command, braced for hunger, and wholly unprepared for mercy. Callahan removed one glove. I will take responsibility. The clerk nearly dropped the paper. Mr. Callahan, you understand this is not a hired arrangement. This is guardianship by county record. Food, shelter, moral responsibility, legal burden. I understand. A farmer coughed. Man would be better off buying a bull. Callahan turned his head. No threat passed his lips. None was needed. The farmer looked away. Maribelle stared at Callahan as though he had spoken in a foreign tongue. She did not trust rescue. Rescue often arrived wearing a new name for bondage. She had been collected before, claimed before, used before. Men did not step from crowds for girls like her unless they wanted labor cheap and obedience cheaper. The clerk lowered his voice. She is of age and strength, but not in lawful standing. No birth paper, no proper family document. If kin come forward, there may be complication. Write my name. Whispers rose sharper. Adopted. The word passed from mouth to mouth. Not hired, not purchased. Adopted. Maribelle flinched as if the word had struck her. She was too old for lullabies, too large for rocking chairs, too rough for anyone to call daughter. That word belonged to small girls with clean collars and soft hands. It did not belong to a woman who could lift a wagon tongue and scare a room quiet by standing in it. Callahan reached for the document. His hand was steady, but the ribbon in her hair had turned the world under him. The clerk dipped the pen and offered it. Callahan signed. A gust of wind moved through the yard, lifting dust around boots and skirts. It tugged the end of Maribelle blue ribbon loose, and for one breath it fluttered against her cheek like something alive trying to remember its way home. The clerk cut the rope from her wrists. Maribelle looked down at the reddened marks, then back at the man who had signed for her without bargaining. What do you want from me? Her voice came low, rough from disuse. Callahan folded the paper and placed it inside his coat. Nothing today. The answer unsettled her more than any cruelty had. Behind them, someone whispered that Callahan had lost his senses along with his wife. Another wondered aloud how long before the giant girl broke his fences or emptied his pantry. Callahan heard all of it. So did Maribelle. He picked up the bundle at her feet. It weighed almost nothing. That all? Maribelle nodded once, a life reduced to a flour sack and a blue ribbon. They walked toward his wagon. Each step drew stairs. She expected him to make her climb in back with the tools, but Callahan opened the front bench and waited. She hesitated, broad hands hanging at her sides, suspicion and longing wrestling across her face. No one had waited for her in years. At last she climbed up. The wagon dipped under her weight and laughter threatened behind them. Callahan looked over his shoulder. The laughter died unborn. As the team started north, Mercy Crossing fell behind in a haze of dust and judgment. Maribelle sat rigid beside him, knees too long for comfort, shoulders hunched as if trying to become smaller through will alone. Callahan did not tell her to sit straight. He did not tell her to be grateful. He did not tell her she was safe. Some words needed a roof, a fire, and time before they could be believed. But as the road bent toward the high country, he glanced once at the blue ribbon moving against her hair, and his face carried a grief so old and startled that Maribelle, despite every warning life had carved into her, wondered whether this silent cowboy had not chosen her by chance at all. The road to Callahan Ranch climbed out of Mercy Crossing and into country that did not waste words. Pine ridges shouldered the sky. Dry grass bowed beneath a hard western wind. Far off, a hawk circled over the brown hills as if looking for something lost long before either traveler had been born. Maribelle kept her hands folded in her lap. They were large hands, knuckled and rough, with small scars crossing the backs like pale threads. She had hidden them most of her life when she could, tucking them beneath aprons, behind skirts, under tables. People stared at hands like hers and imagined breaking, dragging, lifting, never mending. Yet those same hands had once wrapped blankets around feverish babies, stroked frightened calves quiet, and braided the hair of smaller girls who later learned to laugh at her. Callahan drove in silence. That silence bothered her because it carried no obvious blade. Cruel silence had a shape. Disgust had a smell. Command sat in the air before a person spoke it, but this man beside her held the reins loose and steady, giving the team room on the uphill pull, and he seemed less like a man dragging home a burden than one listening for weather. After nearly an hour, Maribelle could bear it no longer. "You bought me no work terms." Callahan looked toward the trail ahead. "I did not buy you. The paper says you took responsibility. It does. That means work. That means supper first." She turned sharply. The wagon bench creaked beneath the shift of her weight. "I can work before supper. I expect so." "Then why not say what needs doing?" A long breath moved through him. "Because you are tired." Those 4 words fell between them heavier than accusation. Maribelle looked away fast, as if the hills had demanded her attention. Tired was a dangerous word. Tired people got called lazy. Tired girls got left behind. Tired bodies were fed last, if there was anything left. She had learned to bury tired so deep that even she rarely visited it. The ranch appeared near sundown. It sat in a wide pocket of valley, guarded by black pines and a long rail fence silvered with age. There was a weathered house of hand-hewn logs, a barn broad enough for winter storms, a smokehouse, a chicken yard, and a corral where 3 horses lifted their heads at the wagon. Everything looked repaired rather than new. Everything had endured. Maribelle noticed the porch first. One rocking chair stood by the door. Another lay folded against the wall, unfinished, its curved runners smooth but unpainted. Callahan stopped the team. Home. The word left him plainly, yet it struck her like something tender thrown from too great a distance. Home had never been a place she trusted. Homes were where people counted how many biscuits she took. Homes were where women sighed when she entered doorways sideways. Homes were where men admired her strength until they resented needing it. She climbed down before Callahan could offer help. Her boots hit the ground hard. The horses in the corral shifted, but none startled. A deep red gelding pressed its nose between the rails. Maribelle stared. "He bites most folks," Callahan murmured. The gelding stretched farther, breathing warm across her sleeve. Without thinking, she lifted one hand. The animal touched her palm with its soft muzzle. Something eased in her face so quickly, Callahan almost missed it. "Almost. That one is Solomon," he offered. "Mean enough to respect honesty." Maribelle pulled her hand back. I have no sugar. Did not ask for any." She glanced at him, confused again by kindness that did not demand performance. Inside the house, warmth held the rooms from the cook stove. The place smelled of coffee, old cedar, leather, and ash. It was tidy in the way solitary people kept things tidy, not out of cheer, but because disorder spoke too loudly when no other voice lived there. Callahan set her flour sack bundle on a bench near the door. "There's a wash basin there. Supper is beans, bread, and dried apple. I can cook. Tomorrow. I can clean. Tomorrow. I can sleep in the barn." No. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Maribelle stiffened. "I have slept in worse, I believe you. Then why waste a room?" Callahan removed his hat and hung it on a peg. Beneath it, his dark hair fell loose around his weathered face. He seemed older there in the lamplight, not by years, but by losses. A room is not wasted when someone sleeps in it. She had no answer for that. After supper, which she ate carefully despite the hollow ache in her stomach, Callahan led her down the short hall. He stopped before a plain door and pushed it open. The room was small, but clean. A narrow bed stood beneath a quilt folded with care. A washstand rested by the wall. There was a peg for clothing, a chest at the foot of the bed, and curtains made from faded calico. Nothing fine, nothing grand. Yet it had been prepared. Maribelle stayed in the doorway. For me? For whoever needed it, that answer might have been safe if his voice had not roughened near the end. She stepped in slowly. The floorboards took her weight with a low groan. Her shoulders nearly filled the space between bed and chest. She looked too large for the room, too strong for its little curtains. too bruised by life for the gentle lamplight. Callahan noticed none of that aloud. He placed a folded pair of stockings on the bed. Beside them sat boots, broad and heavy, nearly new. Maribelle stared at them. "Those are not mine. They may fit. Women boots are never made that size. Those were ordered wrong for a drover 2 winters back. Too narrow for him." "Might suit you." She lowered herself to the bed as if accepting a trap. One boot slid on, then the other. They fit. Maribelle's eyes filled so suddenly she bent forward and gripped the leather tops with both hands. All her life her feet had been punishment. Too big for cast-offs, too costly for new shoes, wrapped in rags when seams split, mocked when soles flapped. Boots that fit felt indecently gentle. Callahan looked away toward the window. "Stove holds heat till morning," he murmured. "Door has a latch. You may use it. A latch, not to lock her in, to lock the world out." After he left, Maribelle sat very still. The house settled around her. A log popped in the stove. Somewhere outside, Solomon stamped once in the corral. She touched the latch, then the boots, then the blue ribbon in her hair. Kindness frightened her more than hunger because hunger made sense. Near midnight, she rose and gathered her flour sack. She would leave before dawn. Better to go while the bed was still strange. Better to disappear before Callahan discovered she ate too much, stood too tall, scared visitors, broke chairs, and filled every room with the shame of being made wrong. She opened the chest only to see whether any of her few things had fallen behind it. Inside lay a child-size wooden horse. It was carved from pine, one leg unfinished, its mane shaped with careful knife marks. Beside it rested a tiny blue blanket and a silver rattle gone dark with age. Maribelle froze. The room was not empty because no one had needed it. It was empty because someone never came. Her fingers hovered over the little wooden horse, and in that quiet room, with new boots on her feet, an escape still in her hand, Maribelle understood that Callahan had not merely opened a door to her, he had opened a grave. Morning came pale and cold, laying silver over the ranch yard and turning each fence rail white with frost. Maribelle had not slept much. She had sat on the edge of the narrow bed with the new boots on her feet and the little wooden horse in her hands, feeling the weight of a grief that did not belong to her and yet had somehow invited her inside. By dawn, she had put the horse back exactly as she found it. Callahan was already outside, splitting kindling beside the woodpile. His axe rose and fell with quiet certainty. No wasted motion, no anger in the swing, just a man making warmth from what the weather had hardened. Maribelle stepped onto the porch with her flour sack in hand. He noticed it. For a moment, neither moved. Then he set the axe down. "Leaving?" She gripped the sack tighter. Changed your mind?" Her gaze shifted toward the barn, the corral, the pale smoke climbing from the chimney. Not entirely. That earned the faintest breath from him. Not a laugh. Something almost living. Breakfast first. She expected questions. None came. That restraint unsettled her more than suspicion would have. By the time they had eaten cornmeal mush and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, Maribelle had placed the flour sack beneath the bench by the door again, though she did not speak of it, and neither did he. Work began after sunrise. Callahan showed her the west fence where winter elk had pushed through. He did not hand her the smallest hammer or pretend she was delicate. He gave her the heavy maul, pointed to the split posts, and trusted her with real labor. That trust moved through her strangely. Men had used her strength all her life, but use and trust were different animals. Use watched for what could be taken. Trust watched for what could be honored. She drove posts until the sound echoed up the valley. Callahan worked beside her, setting rails, cutting wire, tightening braces. They spoke little, but the silence no longer felt empty. By noon, sweat darkened her collar and dust clung to her forehead. Her muscles burned in a clean way, not from being ordered past mercy, but from being useful without being diminished. Near midday, a bell clanged from the direction of the creek road. Callahan straightened. Maribelle turned. The sound came again, sharp and frantic. Then children's voices rose through the timber. Callahan was already moving. "School wagon," he muttered. They ran. For all his size, Callahan moved with the rough grace of a man who had crossed bad ground before. Maribelle followed, longer legs eating the slope, skirts gathered in one fist. The creek ran high from mountain melt, swollen and brown beneath the old timber bridge. At the crossing, a school wagon had gone half off the planks, one rear wheel cracked, the team tangled and screaming. Inside the wagon, children clung to benches while Mrs. Vesta, the schoolteacher, knelt white-faced near the front, trying to keep them from sliding toward the broken side. The wagon groaned. A small girl sobbed. "We are going in." Callahan seized the bridles and quieted the horses with his body and voice low and firm. "Easy, easy now." The bridge shifted. Men from the road crew came running from the far side, but they stopped short when the wagon dipped another inch. Fear makes honest cowards of many people, and no shame lived in that. But children do not have time for adults to finish being afraid. Maribelle stepped onto the bridge. "Eyes stay back," one roadman shouted. "You will drop it clean through?" She ignored him. The boards bowed beneath her weight. The wagon slid. A boy cried out. Maribelle reached the rear, planted her boots against the slick planks, and took hold of the iron side rail. Every eye fixed on her. Her arms tightened. The muscles of her shoulders rose like braided rope beneath the torn sleeves of her gray dress. Her jaw set. Her feet shifted once, finding purchase. Then Maribelle pulled, not wildly, not for show. She pulled as if every year of being called too much had been stored in her bones for this single mercy. The wagon moved an inch, then another. Callahan saw what she was doing and threw his weight to the front axle, guiding, steadying, trusting her strength instead of fearing it. Again, Maribelle breathed hard through her nose and pulled again. The cracked wheels screamed against timber. The children inside fell silent. Even the horses seemed to understand. With one last heave, Maribelle dragged the rear of the wagon back from the broken edge, enough for the roadmen to surge forward and brace it with beams. "Children out," Callahan ordered. One by one, he lifted them down and passed them to waiting arms. When a tiny boy froze on the step, Maribelle reached for him. He stared at her enormous hand. For one terrible breath, she expected him to shrink away. Instead, he climbed into her arms and held her neck with both hands. She went still. The boy was no heavier than a sack of flour, but his trust weighed more than any load she had carried. "You are warm," he whispered. Something in her face broke open and healed at the same time. The last child out was a girl with dark braids and a scraped cheek. She looked at Maribelle with a strange, searching expression. Mrs. Vesta hurried over, trembling. "Bless you both. Bless you, Mr. Callahan." "Bless you, miss," the road crew murmured now, not laughing, not sneering, looking at Maribelle as if their eyes had been poor tools and had finally sharpened. The little girl with braids stepped closer. Maribelle crouched as best she could, bringing herself nearer to the child height. "Are you hurt?" The girl shook her head. "My grandmother had a picture." Maribelle blinked. A baby wrapped in blue. She used to say her name was Belle from the river place. The child pointed at the faded ribbon in Maribelle's hair. She said the bad kin lost her on purpose. All sound thinned. The creek rushed below. Horses blew hard. Mrs. Vesta pressed a hand to her mouth. Callahan turned slowly. Maribelle felt the world tilt under her new boots. "What did you call me?" Her voice was hardly there. The child looked suddenly frightened by the silence she had made. "Belle." Grandma said there was a lost bell with a blue ribbon. Maribelle reached up and touched the ribbon that had traveled with her through hunger, mockery, and nameless years. Behind her, Callahan's face had gone gray beneath the weathering, as if a ghost had stepped from the creek water and spoken his dead wife promise aloud. Then Mrs. Vesta whispered the name of the grandmother, and Callahan knew exactly where they had to go before sundown. They reached the old river road as sundown bled behind the pines, with Mrs. Vesta riding beside the wagon and the dark-braided child tucked beneath a quilt in back. The girl name was Lenora, and after her first brave sentence at the bridge, she had gone quiet, frightened by the size of the truth she had carried without knowing it. Maribelle sat beside Callahan again, but not as she had the day before. Then she had braced against him as a stranger. Now she braced against a past that had begun reaching for her with cold fingers. The road followed the creek into lower ground where cottonwoods grew thick and the wind smelled of wet leaves. Mrs. Vesta had explained what she could. Lenora grandmother, old Emmeline Sayer, had once worked as a laundress for families near the river settlement. She kept stories the way some folks kept coins, hidden in cloth and brought out only when trust was present. One of those stories was about a baby called Belle, a blue ribbon, and relatives who claimed the child had vanished during flood season. Lost on purpose, Lenora had repeated once in a small voice. Those 3 words sat in the wagon like a loaded rifle. Callahan had barely spoken since. Maribelle noticed his hands on the reins. They were steady, but the knuckles had gone pale. He had known something from the first moment. She understood that now. He had seen her ribbon and chosen her under a weight she could not yet name. That knowledge warmed nothing. It frightened her, because if Callahan had saved her for a ghost, then perhaps Maribelle herself remained unwanted after all. Emmeline Sayer lived in a leaning cabin under 2 cottonwoods. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin blue thread. A yellow dog barked once from the step, then wagged its tail when Lenora called. The old woman opened the door before they reached it, wrapped in a brown shawl, her white hair braided thick over one shoulder. Her eyes were cloudy, but not empty. They moved first to Lenora, then Mrs. Vesta, then Callahan. Last of all, they found Maribelle. The old woman gripped the doorframe. Merciful heaven! Maribelle stopped at the yard gate. The fence came only to her waist. She felt enormous again, clumsy, exposed, like something dragged out for inspection. Emmeline stepped down carefully. Turn your face, child. Maribelle did not move. Callahan stood a few paces behind her. You owe her truth, not commands. The old woman nodded, tears already gathering, fairly spoken. Maribelle lifted her chin. I am not a child. No. Emmeline's voice trembled. But I saw you when you were. Silence gathered under the cottonwoods. The old woman invited them inside, though Maribelle had to duck through the door and sit on a bench near the wall because the chairs looked too fragile. A lamp burned on the table. Emmeline took a tin box from a shelf, unlocked it with a key tied to her neck, and laid out the past one piece at a time. A scrap of blue cloth, a charcoal sketch of a round-cheeked baby, a letter browned at the folds. Callahan stepped back when he saw the handwriting. Maribelle saw it too. The letters were graceful, slanted, careful. Emmeline touched the page. This came from Abigail Callahan before she died. She had been trying to find the river child. She believed the family lied. The room changed around Callahan's name. Maribelle turned toward him. Your wife? His face held still, but grief moved behind his eyes like stormlight behind clouds. Yes, Emmeline unfolded the letter with reverence. Abigail had a sister once. Not by blood, by heart. A young widow named Rosalie, mother to a baby girl. Strong little thing, even then. Rosalie died of fever, and kin came from the North Branch to take the child. They wanted the small inheritance attached to her mother name, not the girl. Abigail heard later that the baby vanished during a wagon crossing. She never believed it. Maribelle's hands had curled on her knees. Why? Because one of those kin sold the motherland within a month. Because he drank on the money for years. Because when asked where the child was buried, he named a creek that had no graveyard. Callahan looked at the floor. Emmeline's voice softened. Abigail searched. She wrote. She asked teamsters, churches, county homes. Then sickness took her strength. Near the end, she made her husband promise to find the child with the blue ribbon. The lamp hummed. Maribelle could hear her own breathing. Callahan finally spoke, each word cut low. I failed. The words did not ask pity. They carried sentence and punishment both. Maribelle stared at him. This powerful, silent man who had faced a laughing town without blinking now looked unable to stand beneath one dead woman request. I looked for 2 years, Callahan continued. Found 3 wrong children, paid writers, sent letters, followed rumors. Then my son died before drawing breath, and Abigail followed 3 days later. After that, I stopped being good for much beyond work. Emmeline wiped her cheek. You were grieving. I was breathing, not the same. Maribelle looked at the blue scrap on the table. Her fingers rose to the ribbon in her hair. She had no memory of Rosalie, no memory of flood season, of relatives, of being carried away. Her life began in fragments. A cold shed, a woman complaining about the size of her, boys daring one another to tug her hair, and the ribbon always there because some part of her would not let it be thrown away. "So I was wanted once," she whispered. The words broke the room more than any sob could have. Emmeline covered her mouth. Mrs. Vesta bowed her head. Callahan closed his eyes. Maribelle stood too fast, striking the bench against the wall, but not enough to be kept. Callahan lifted his gaze. "That is not truth. It is the only truth I lived." She moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her, not by force, only by the ache inside it. "I knew the ribbon when I saw you. I did not know your name. I did not know if you were the child Abigail sought, but I knew enough to understand I was being given one last chance to keep a promise." Maribelle turned. Pain had made her face fierce. "Then did you take me for her?" Callahan absorbed the question as if he deserved it. "At first, maybe I stepped forward because of the promise." Her eyes shone. He continued, rougher now. "But I brought you home because no person should stand alone while others decide whether she is worth mercy." The answer reached her. Not fully, not safely, but it reached. Then Emmeline unfolded one final paper from the tin box, and her hands shook harder than before. "There is more." Callahan stiffened. "What more? The North Branch kin. They are not gone. One came asking last month about any surviving child of Rosalie. There is land money still unsettled, and if they prove legal claim, they may try to bind her labor until the court decides." Maribelle felt the walls close in. Outside, a horse snorted in the dark. Emmeline looked up at her with sorrow plain and terrible. "Child, the people who threw you away may be coming back to claim what is left of you." By noon the next day, Mercy Crossing had gathered itself into judgment. That was how towns often behaved when frightened by truth. They did not sit quietly with it. They called meetings, they arranged benches, they cleared throats. They turned pain into procedure so no one had to confess how much cruelty had once passed for common sense. The town hall smelled of lamp oil, damp wool, and old pine boards. Men stood along the walls with hats in hand. Women sat stiff-backed in rows, whispering behind gloved fingers. Children pressed near the windows, for children are drawn to fairness before they learn how adults spoil it. Maribelle stood beside Callahan near the front. She wore the same gray dress, freshly washed, but still strained at the shoulders. Her blue ribbon had been retied more carefully that morning, though her hands had trembled while doing it. The new boots held firm beneath her. She had wanted to leave them behind, thinking such kindness might be used against her, but Callahan had set them by the door without a word. A person facing wolves ought to wear boots that fit. The county clerk sat at the long table with Emmeline papers spread before him. Mrs. Vesta was there too, one hand resting on Lenora's shoulder. The little girl kept looking at Maribelle with brave worry, as if afraid the truth she had spoken might still hurt the one it was meant to save. Then the North Branch kin arrived. There were 3 of them. Harlan Pike came first, a narrow man with a polished cane and a face that looked forever displeased by daylight. Beside him walked his sister, Maud Pike, sharp-chinned and black-eyed beneath a feathered hat too fine for the road she had traveled. Behind them came a younger cousin, Ellis, broad enough in the chest but weak in the mouth. Harlan looked at Maribelle, and no recognition warmed him. Only calculation. "Well," Maud murmured, loud enough for half the hall. She certainly grew inconvenient. Callahan shifted one step. The room felt that step. Harlan placed papers on the table. "We come in lawful concern for the surviving daughter of Rosalie Vale. If this woman is indeed that child, then our family holds nearest blood claim. Any prior transfer of guardianship made without knowledge of kin may be contested." The word family struck Maribelle strangely. It sounded clean in his mouth. Too clean. The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "This woman was placed yesterday under Mr. Callahan lawful guardianship due to lack of known family." A temporary error Harlan returned, one easily corrected. Callahan's voice came low from beneath his hat brim. "She is not." Cattle wandered through a broken gate, Harlan smiled without kindness. No. Cattle have papers more orderly than hers. Murmurs moved across the hall. Maud lifted a handkerchief to her nose, though there was no foul smell except greed wearing perfume. We are prepared to assume custody while the court determines inheritance matters. Maribelle looked at Emmeline. The old woman's face had gone pale. The clerk frowned. Custody. She is grown. Without proper birth record, lawful age and identity remain questions, Harland replied. Until settled, we would provide supervision. Naturally, given her unusual size and capability, she could assist our household and farm during a review. There it was. Not love. Not remorse. Labor. A familiar cold settled in Maribelle's stomach. The past had not come back with open arms. It had come carrying ledgers. Callahan placed one scarred hand on the table. You lost her once. Harland's eyes flicked toward him. Floods are tragic. You sold her motherland after... Debts required settlement. You never marked a grave. Bodies are not always recovered. Callahan leaned closer, and every plank in that room seemed to hold its breath. Say one more polished thing, and I may forget this is a meeting house. The clerk rapped the table. Order. Maribelle expected someone to laugh at Callahan, to scold him, to remind him that a quiet rancher did not stand above law. But no laughter came. The memory of the school wagon still lived in those people. So did the sight of Maribelle's arms pulling children back from death, while others hesitated. Public truth, once seen, could not be fully unseen. Mrs. Vesta rose. I witnessed this woman save 6 children yesterday. No payment asked, no praise sought. If Mercy Crossing has a conscience left, it should not hand her to people who speak of her as equipment. A few women nodded, then Lenora slipped from beneath Mrs. Vesta's hand and walked to Maribelle. She reached up and took 2 of Maribelle's large fingers in her small hand. She carried Thomas like he was worth being gentle with, Lenora declared, voice shaking but clear. Mean people do not do that, the hall softened. Maribelle could have hidden behind that softness. Part of her wanted to. She'd spent a lifetime waiting for others to decide her fate, and yesterday Callahan had done a merciful version of the same thing. He had stepped forward when she could not. Yet mercy that never taught a person to stand could become another kind of cage. She looked at Callahan. His eyes held no command, only steadiness. Maribelle took her hand gently from Lenora and stepped forward. The room had never seemed smaller. I know what I look like to you. Her voice came rough at first, unused to carrying across rooms. I know because most of you told me yesterday without shame. Too big, too costly, too hard to place. Too much trouble for a table, a doorway, a dress, a family name. Faces lowered. She swallowed. I believed you. Callahan's eyes changed then, pain moving through the stillness. Maribelle touched the ribbon in her hair. But yesterday, a child climbed into my arms without fear. This morning, a horse waited for my hand. Last night, an old woman showed me that my mother tied blue around me before the world tied shame. So I'm done helping others carry the lie that I'm only useful when I'm owned. Harlan Kane tapped once. Emotional speeches do not alter law. No, Maribelle answered, turning toward him, but truth alters people, and people alter what they will permit. The hall stirred. She faced the clerk. I do not go with them. Harlan's smile thinned. Refusal may bring court action. Against you. Against Mr. Callahan. Against his ranch if he shelters disputed property. Property. The word struck harder than his cane could have. Callahan straightened. Try. But Maribelle heard what others might not. She heard the cost beneath that single word. Lawyers, travel, fees, liens. Land already carrying the weight of winter and debt. Callahan would ruin himself before handing her over, and that knowledge pierced deeper than threat. The meeting ended with no final ruling. The clerk would send inquiries to the county seat. The Pikes would remain in town. Callahan would retain guardianship for the present. For the present was a narrow bridge, and every soul in that hall knew it. Outside, snow began to fall, soft as ash. Callahan guided Maribelle toward the wagon, but she paused near the steps. Across the street, Harlan Pike watched her from beneath his black umbrella, and Maud whispered to him with a smile that promised patience. Maribelle looked toward the high ridges beyond town. If she stayed, Callahan might lose everything. If she left, the Pikes would win the shape of her body, but perhaps the ranch would remain untouched. That evening, while Callahan fed the horses and the first storm wind moved across the valley, Maribelle folded the tiny blue blanket from the empty room, placed the wooden horse carefully on the pillow, and wrote 4 words on a scrap of flower paper. "Forgive me. I choose." Callahan found the note before the lamp burned dry. That was the mercy of restless grief. It never let a man sleep long when another leaving had already hollowed him once. He had come in from the barn with snow on his shoulders, carrying an armload of split wood, and the house had greeted him wrong. No footstep in the spare room, no soft shift of floorboards, no careful breath of a person trying not to take up too much of the world. He set the wood down slowly. Maribelle. The house answered with stove hiss and wind. He moved down the hall, though some part of him already knew. A man who had buried a wife and a son learned the shape of absence quicker than was decent. He opened the door. The bed was made. The boots were gone. The flour sack was gone. On the pillow sat the unfinished wooden horse, and across its back lay the tiny blue blanket that had once waited for a child who never drew breath. The note rested beneath it. "Forgive me. I choose." Callahan stood very still. There were moments in a life when pain returned not as memory, but as weather. It filled the room. It found every crack. It made breathing an act of stubbornness. He had once watched Abigail fade by inches, holding his hand and begging him not to let the lost child remain lost. He had once stood over a grave small enough to break the strongest man in the county. He had survived both by closing doors inside himself. Now one of those doors had been torn open by 4 words written on flower paper. He took his coat from the peg. Outside, the storm had thickened. Snow moved hard across the yard, slanting under a moon hidden by cloud. Solomon stamped in the corral, ears forward, as if he too understood that someone gentle had gone where gentleness could freeze. Callahan saddled him by lantern light. The red gelding fought the bit once, then settled when Callahan pressed a hand to his neck. "Find her." The horse blew steam. They rode north first toward the ridge trail because Maribelle would not go south into town where the Pikes waited. She would take herself away from Callahan land, away from court threats, away from anyone who might be punished for sheltering her. She would choose the hardest road because unwanted people often believed their absence was the finest gift they could offer. That belief could kill a soul long before snow did. The windy race tracks almost as soon as they were made. Callahan leaned low in the saddle, reading what little the storm allowed. A broken crust near the fence gap, a handprint on a snow-covered rail, one deep boot mark beneath the pines where she had paused. He imagined her there, broad shoulders bent against the weather, blue ribbon hidden beneath her shawl, carrying all her strength like a sentence. "Fool woman," he muttered, but the words had no anger left in them, only fear. He found the first sign of trouble near the creek bend. A strip of gray cloth had snagged on barbed wire where the old cattle path narrowed. Beyond it, the snow showed a slide mark down toward the rocks. Callahan dismounted. His heart hammered once. Hard. Maribelle. The storm swallowed her name. He climbed down the bank, boots skidding, one hand gripping pine roots. At the bottom, water rushed black between ice shelves. No body, no blood. No broken shape against the stones. He breathed again only when Solomon whinnied above and pulled toward the west. There. A second trail, faint and staggering, led away from the creek toward the abandoned pass road. She had fallen, then risen. Of course she had. Callahan followed until his gloves stiffened with ice. Twice, he had to lead Solomon under low branches. Once the gelding nearly went to his knees on hidden stone. The pass road climbed toward old timber country, where line shacks stood from the years when cattle were pushed higher in summer. Most had collapsed. One still held walls if the roof had not caved. Then, near a deadfall half buried in snow, he found her shawl. It was caught beneath the branch, torn loose and frozen at the edge. The brown wool was unmistakable. He lifted it with both hands, and something inside him went quiet in the worst possible way. Beyond the shawl, the snow had blown smooth. No footprints, no drag marks, nothing. Callahan turned in a slow circle, lantern raised. The world offered only white. Maribelle. This time his voice broke. The sound startled him. It had been years since his own heart had come through his throat so nakedly. He had spent so long being useful, steady, quiet. Men praised him for endurance and never understood that endurance could become a coffin if a man mistook it for living. He pressed the shawl to his chest. "I was not done," he whispered into the storm. Not done protecting her, not done learning the shape of her silence, not done watching Solomon lower his mean head for her palm, not done hearing her steps in the hall, and seeing her sit carefully at his table, noticing how she broke bread into small pieces as if apologizing to hunger, not done loving her. The truth came without permission. It did not arrive soft. It struck like an axe into green wood, splitting him clean through. He loved the giant girl nobody wanted. Loved her not as a promise to Abigail, not as a duty written on county paper, not as a rescued child of old guilt, but as Maribelle, full-grown and wounded, proud and frightened, strong enough to move wagons and tender enough to return a wooden horse to a pillow like an apology. He loved her, and he had let her believe leaving would spare him. That was his failure now. Callahan shoved the shawl inside his coat and forced himself to think. Wind from the east, snow covering open ground. If she had gone beyond the deadfall, tracks might vanish in minutes. If she turned toward the old pass, she might seek the mining road. If she fell again, no one would see her until spring. A sound rose through the storm, small, not Maribel's voice, a child crying. Callahan froze, every sense sharpening. The cry came again from somewhere beyond the timber, thin as a thread, then cut off sharply. Solomon heard it too. The horse tossed his head toward the slope above. Callahan grabbed the reins and climbed. The line shack appeared between the trees, half hidden by snow and darkness. Its chimney leaned crooked. One shutter slapped weakly in the wind. A faint glow flickered through a crack in the wall. He ran the last stretch. At the door, he found marks in the snow at last. Deep boot prints. Smaller prints, too. A child had crossed here. Callahan pushed the door open. Smoke rolled out low and bitter. The room was dim, lit by a struggling fire built from broken chair legs. In the far corner, beneath Maribel's own coat, lay a small boy with his ankle wrapped in torn gray cloth. Maribelle crouched beside him, bare-armed despite the cold, feeding the fire one splinter at a time. She looked up. For one heartbeat, neither spoke. Her face was pale. Snow melted in her tangled hair. The blue ribbon hung loose against her cheek. One sleeve was torn away, and a dark bruise climbed her temple. Callahan could barely breathe her name. Maribel's eyes filled, not from weakness, but from the terrible realization that she had failed to disappear cleanly. Then the boy beneath the coat stirred and whispered that men with lanterns were coming up the trail behind him. Maribelle turned toward the door, and Callahan saw fear return to her face. Not fear of the storm, fear of who had followed the child into the mountains. The boy was Ellis Pike. Not the weak-mouthed cousin from the meeting hall, but a smaller child with the same unfortunate name, no more than 8 years old, hollow-cheeked and shaking beneath Maribel's coat. He had been sent ahead with a lantern to watch the ridge path, because cruel families often found small hands useful when their own were too cowardly for cold work. Maribelle had found him half buried near the creek wash, ankle twisted, lips blue, still clutching the dead lantern like failure might earn him punishment. So she had carried him. That was the part Callahan understood before anyone explained it. She'd been running from being claimed, hunted by those who saw her as property, and still she had stopped for a child from the very bloodline that wanted to bind her. She had torn her sleeve to wrap his ankle. She had given him her coat. She had broken furniture for fire. She had spent what warmth she had left on someone who might lead danger to her door. There are people the world calls too much because their bodies fill a room. Then there are people whose mercy fills it larger. Maribelle was the second kind. Callahan closed the shack door behind him and crossed to her. He did not take her by the shoulders, though every frightened part of him wanted proof she was solid. Instead, he knelt and touched 2 fingers lightly to the bruise at her temple. She flinched, then held still. "Can you stand?" "I can carry him if needed. That was not my question." Her mouth tightened. "Yes," the boy whimpered. "Uncle Harlan told me not to come back without seeing where she went." Callahan's jaw set. Outside, faint voices moved among the trees. Lantern light flickered far below, 3 or 4 flames bobbing in the storm. Not close enough yet, but coming. Maribelle pushed herself upright. She swayed once. Callahan rose with her, one hand hovering near her elbow without closing around it. "Go out the back," she murmured. "Take the boy. I can draw them off." "No, they want me." "No. If they find you sheltering me, they will use it against you." Callahan stepped closer. The fire lit one side of his face, leaving the other in shadow. "Let them, Callahan." His name in her voice was not argument. It was plea. It almost undid him. He reached into his coat and pulled out her frozen shawl. "I found this with no tracks beyond it." Her eyes lowered. "For 10 minutes I thought the mountain had taken you." The wind pressed hard against the walls. Smoke curled through a gap in the roof. "I was trying to spare you, I know." His voice was rough, quieter than the storm, and stronger than any shout. "That is what near broke me." She looked up then. Callahan had faced public scorn, county law, greedy kin, and mountain weather with a face of stone. But in that small, ruined shack, before a woman who had never trusted herself to be wanted, the stone gave way. "I lost Abigail. I lost a son. I made grief into a house and called it duty. Then you walked into it wearing boots too new for your sorrow, and every quiet room remembered how to listen." He swallowed hard. "I do not want a life spared of you, Maribelle. I want the burden. I want the table needing more bread. I want Solomon waiting at the fence. I want your steps in the hall. If trouble comes, it comes to both of us." Tears stood in her eyes, bright and disbelieving. "You should not say such things because of fear. I am saying them because fear stripped me honest." The boy stirred beneath the coat. "They are close." Maribelle wiped her face with the back of one large hand, ashamed of nothing now except the tremble she could not hide. "Then we decide fast." Callahan looked around the shack. Back wall broken near the lower logs. One small window nailed shut, roof weak. Fire low. Injured child. Bruised woman. Armed greed approaching through snow. A bad hand. He had played worse. "Can you lift that table?" Maribelle glanced at the heavy plank table slumped near the wall. One leg was cracked, but the top remained solid. "Yes. Block the door after I step out." Her eyes sharpened. "You are not facing them alone." "No." "I am buying time for truth to catch up." Before she could answer, voices rose outside. "Callahan!" Harlan Pike's voice carried thin and sharp through the snow. "We know you are there. Bring out the woman and the boy. This need not become unpleasant." Maribel's face hardened at the word woman, not because it insulted her, but because he spoke it as one might say wagon or tool. Callahan opened the door and stepped onto the threshold. Snow whipped across him. Lanterns glowed below the shack. Harlan stood with Maud, the older Ellis, and 2 hired men from town who looked less certain with every gust. Behind them, farther down the slope, more lights appeared. Not Pike lanterns, town lanterns. Mrs. Vesta had come. The road crew, the clerk, Lenora father. Others, too, climbing slow through storm, drawn by Callahan tracks and the rumor that a child was missing. Truth was coming uphill on tired legs. Harlan saw the lights and raised his cane. "This is a family business." Callahan stood broad in the doorway. "No child freezing in the dark is family business. No woman hunted for labor is family business. It is witness business now." Maud hissed something to her brother. Inside the shack, Maribelle dragged the table behind Callahan but did not block the door. Instead, she lifted Ellis Pike into her arms, wrapped him tight in her coat, and stepped out beside Callahan. The storm struck her bare arms. She did not bend. The townsfolk reached the clearing in staggered silence. Lantern light fell over the scene. Maribelle towering bruised and coatless, holding the injured Pike child as gently as a mother holds a sleeping infant, Callahan beside her with her shawl against his chest, Harland caught between claim and exposure. Lenora pushed through the adults, crying when she saw the boy. He is hurt. Maribelle lowered him into Mrs. Vesta waiting arms. Ankle turned. He needs warmth. The small Ellis clutched Maribelle's fingers before they slipped away. Please do not let Uncle take me back first. That sentence changed the whole mountain. Harland began to protest, but the hired men stepped away from him. The clerk stared as if legal ink had suddenly grown a conscience. Maud turned pale beneath her feathered hat. Callahan looked at Maribelle, and she understood. This was no longer only her trial. The boy had opened another door. Mrs. Vesta wrapped Ellis tighter. What has been happening in that house? The child began to cry. Maribelle stood in the snow, every eye upon her again, but the old shame did not find its place. Not this time. Callahan's hand, warm and steady, closed around hers where everyone could see. The town had finally witnessed her heart. Yet as dawn threatened beyond the ridge, Callahan let go first, not from rejection, but from a sorrowful tenderness that frightened her more deeply. His gaze moved over the gathered people, the rescued child, the woman he loved, and the ruined path of his own grief. You deserve more than a haunted ranch and a man still learning how to live, he murmured for her alone. Maribelle turned toward him, but he had already stepped back into the falling snow, wearing the face of a man preparing to give up the very thing he wanted most. Maribelle followed Callahan before the snow could hide him from her. He had only gone as far as the leaning pine beyond the shack, where the lantern light thinned and the town voices softened behind him. His shoulders were bowed, not from weakness, but from the old habit of carrying pain alone before anyone could offer to help. She stopped beside him. For a little while, neither spoke. Below them, Mrs. Vesta wrapped young Ellis Pike in blankets, while the clerk questioned Harland with a voice that had lost its fear of polished men. Maud sat on a stump, pale and silent. The hired men stood apart from the Pikes, their shame plain enough to be useful. Lenora held the rescued boy hand, and all around them, Mercy Crossing watched the truth settle into the snow. It was not a grand punishment. Life rarely heals by making villains the center of the story. Harland Pike would answer to the county seat. Maud would answer to the records she had helped bury. The younger Ellis would be placed with Mrs. Vesta until proper care could be arranged. Those things mattered. But they were not the heart of it. The heart of it stood beneath the pine, afraid of being loved. Maribelle looked at Callahan's profile, at the snow caught in his beard, at the tired grief in his eyes. You think letting me go is kindness, his jaw moved once. I think you have been claimed enough, yes. Her voice remained steady, so stop deciding for me. He turned toward her then. She had never spoken so plainly to him, and perhaps she had never spoken so plainly to herself. The blue ribbon brushed her cheek. The bruise at her temple had darkened, yet her eyes were clear. I am not asking to be adopted like a stray bundle left in town, she continued. I am not asking to be hidden from court papers or fed out of pity. I am not your wife. Promise returned from the grave. I am Maribelle. I choose where I stand. Callahan, breathing roughened, and I stand with you. The words changed him slowly. Not all at once, men built of endurance often receive mercy like frozen ground receiving rain. First it struck. Then it waited. Then, deep where no eye could see, something softened. I am afraid, he admitted. That simple confession seemed to cost him more than any ride through the storm. Maribelle stepped closer. So am I. I may grieve on days I should be grateful. Then I will learn those days. I may go quiet. I know quiet. I have little to offer. At that, Maribelle almost smiled. It came small and trembling, but real. You gave me boots that fit. His eyes closed. No courtship speech could have answered better. No poem could have held more. Boots that fit meant a body was not an inconvenience. A room with a latch meant fear could rest. A place at the front wagon bench meant shame did not have to ride with tools. A hand held before witnesses meant belonging did not need to whisper. Callahan took her hand then, not to lead, not to claim, but to be held in return. When they walked back to the clearing, the town grew quiet. Maribelle did not hide behind him. Callahan did not step in front of her. They stood side by side while the clerk removed his hat. "Miss Maribelle," the clerk began, then corrected himself with visible shame. "Maribelle, the temporary guardianship can be dissolved once identity is confirmed. The county will not return you to the Pikes." Harlan tried to speak. The clerk turned on him. Not one word. A murmur moved through the townsfolk, and this time it was not the sound of gossip. It was the sound of people finding the courage to become better than they had been yesterday. Emmeline, who had ridden up wrapped in quilts, reached for Maribelle's hands. "Your mother wanted you." Maribelle bowed her head. Those 4 words entered the oldest wound and did not close it completely. Some hurts never vanish in a single sentence, but the wound changed shape. It no longer proved she had been unwanted. It proved she had been stolen from love and had somehow lived long enough to find it again. By spring, Mercy Crossing spoke of that winter night with lowered voices. Harlan Pike faced charges for false claims and mistreatment within his own household. Maud left the county before lilacs bloomed. Young Ellis remained with Mrs. Vesta, where his ankle healed and his laughter returned in cautious pieces. The town sent flour, nails, blankets, and apologies to Callahan Ranch. Some apologies came awkward. Some came late. Maribelle accepted only the honest ones. The ranch changed slowly, as all true homes do. The spare room did not remain a grave. Callahan finished the wooden horse not for the son he had lost, but for the first child who needed it. Then another child came for a season. Then a girl with no kin. Then 2 brothers whose wagon family had gone west without room for them. Maribelle taught them how to mend harness, knead bread, gentle horses, and stand tall without making themselves cruel. Callahan taught them fences, weather signs, and the quiet honor of doing a thing properly when no one watched. Above the front door, Maribelle tied the faded blue ribbon, not as a relic of sorrow, as a sign. Travelers began to know it. Children knew it best. A blue ribbon above a ranch door meant no hungry soul would be measured by size, usefulness, birth papers, or the fear of others. It meant someone inside understood what it was to be left standing in public shame and still be worthy of a chair by the fire. Years later, when gray touched Callahan beard and silver threaded Maribelle honey blonde hair, they would sit on the porch where the second rocking chair finally stood finished. Solomon, old and mean to everyone except her, would graze near the fence. Children would run in and out of the yard, some staying, some moving on, all carrying a little more courage than they had brought. Callahan would sometimes reach for her hand without speaking. Maribelle would let him. That was how healing looked in the high country. Not loud, not perfect, not free of memory. It looked like bread enough for one more plate. Boots drying by the stove. A latch used by choice, not fear. A giant woman laughing without apology. A silent cowboy learning that love was not a betrayal of grief, but proof that grief had once come from love. And if any soul passing through Mercy Crossing still wondered whether the girl nobody wanted had finally found a name, the answer was tied above the door in blue. She had got home. This story is a fictional, family-safe, historical Western romance created for entertainment purposes. All characters, names, places, events, and situations are imaginary. Any resemblance to real people, living or deceased, or real events is purely coincidental. The story avoids graphic violence and mature content, focusing instead on emotional healing, dignity, belonging, resilience, chosen family, and wholesome romance.